Good evening and welcome to Eagle Eye's 2022 Eye on the Midterms. I'm Blake Phillips.
And I'm Maddie Larkin. Tonight, we have 34 out of 100 U.S. Senate seats up for grabs and all 435 U.S. congressional seats open. We have a couple of tight races across the U.S., including Pennsylvania, Nevada, and Georgia, that we will be discussing throughout the evening, in addition to all of the pertinent races taking place right here in Alabama.
Before we break down all of the races tonight, we wanted to give you a rundown of where and how you can vote before the Alabama polls close at 7 p.m. tonight. Eagle Eye reporter John Carter has more.
As midterms are coming up, it's important to know both your voter registration status and polling place. As an Alabama resident, the fastest way to check these things is online. For currently registered voters who wish to view their registration status, visit myinfo.alabamavotes.gov.
Once there, enter your information into the respective boxes. Then, hit the Look Up button. The address of your polling place should be displayed, as well as the hours that the polling place is open. You should also be able to view any absentee or provisional ballots you may have for the current election.
For Alabama residents who haven't registered to vote or wish to change their address for voting purposes, visit sos.alabama.gov.
Here, you can find resources to add to or change your registration status, register for absentee voting, and have access to other resources, such as a calendar of elections and information regarding some of the issues you may be voting on. For Alabama residents who wish to submit an absentee ballot, click the box that says Absentee Voting. Once there, select the application for the county associated with your permanent voting address. This form must be physically filled out and mailed to the address listed on the absentee ballot request form. Remember that your absentee ballot request form must be received 7 days before the election, and the absentee ballot must be received by noon on Election Day. For non-Alabama residents, make sure you check your status in the state of your permanent voting address. Remember, to be eligible to vote, you must be a United States citizen, 18 years of age, not convicted of a disqualifying felony, and not declared mentally incompetent by a court of law. Check your state's restrictions for absentee voting, as laws regarding absentee voting may vary by state.
As a final reminder, midterm elections take place on Tuesday, November 8th. Be sure to tune in to our live election coverage on the 8th and follow Eagle Eye TV for all Auburn news updates.
Thank you, John. We're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back after this. You're watching Eagle Eye TV's 2022 Eye on the Midterms. Welcome back to Eagle Eye TV's 2022 Eye on the Midterms show. We now go to Eagle Eye reporter Kelis McGhee, who is live at the polls. Kelis?
And I'm going to vote every opportunity, every chance I get. So I'm going to vote. And I got on the phone. I called my grandson. I called my son. I called my daughter. I called my siblings. You all make sure you all get out there and vote today. Let's be a game changer. If we want things to happen, we're going to have to be part of the game.
Starting at 7 a.m. this morning, polling locations have been open in Alabama for the midterm elections. And throughout the day, voters traveled in and out as they cast their ballots to vote for Alabama's state and federal representatives and amendments.
I was excited because I get a chance to make a difference. My vote.
Outside the polls, police officers were there for safety purposes, and campaigners set up tents 30 feet or more away from the buildings and passed out sample ballots to people who wanted one. At the Clarion Inn Suites, Sherry Reese, the Democratic candidate for state senator of District 27, was on site campaigning for herself.
I'm the candidate. I'm out here, ensuring people know that I'm on the ballot. I'm the actual candidate on the ballot, asking for last-minute votes, cheering people on, thanking people for coming out to exercise their right. So it feels good. It's been a great morning for me. I've met a lot of cool people, and I'm just thankful to be here.
Although voting polls were busy throughout the day, there was a lack of long lines, which made the process easier for some voters and disheartened others. Overall, voters were happy to cast their votes and make their voice heard.
It's important to have our voice heard no matter which party you're voting for or which amendments you like or dislike, it at least gives us the opportunity to have that voiced.
You're still rallying support for their candidate. As you can see in the package, I traveled to 3 polling locations here in Auburn today to get a better idea of how voters were taking advantage of their constitutional right. And as I observed, there was a lack of long lines today, but that lack of long lines could have been an increase in early voting. With voting almost being over, and it will end at 7 o'clock Central Time, you need to stay tuned to our show, our midterm show, to get an idea of how Alabama did in this year's election. I'm Kelis McGhee with EYTV News. Thank you for watching.
The candidates for the Alabama representative to the United States Senate are Republican Katie Britt, Democrat Will Boyd, and Libertarian John Sophocleous. Katie Britt, who worked previously under Senator Richard Shelby as press secretary and later chief of staff, won the Republican Party's nomination in a runoff against Mo Brooks after receiving 64.8% of the vote. Britt's platform consists of issues such as protecting election integrity, immigration, and the government's, quote, reckless spending. Britt is a pro-life advocate and, if elected, would become the first female Alabama U.S. Senator.
John Sophocleous, an economic professor here at Auburn University, once ran for governor in 2002 as part of a project with the Auburn University Student Libertarians. His key issues include put the power back in the hands of the governed, battle inflation, and abolish all gun control laws.
Dr. Will Boyd is the Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate. He ran unsuccessfully for the U.S. Senate in 2017, for lieutenant governor in 2018, and the U.S. House in 2016. He also served as chairman of the Lauderdale County Democratic Executive Committee. Last semester, former Eagle Eye executive producer A.J. Revera sat down and spoke with Dr. Boyd. Let's take a look.
I'm your host, A.J. Revera, and today I'm joined by Democrat Senate candidate Dr. Will Boyd. Dr. Boyd, how are you doing today?
Fine, sir. Good to be with you.
Well, we're glad to have you here. So let's jump right on into it. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your campaign?
Yes, sir. Well, I'm from South Carolina. Obviously, I've lived in Alabama quite a while now. I've served a number of positions around the state. I've had the opportunity to serve in the party, and now I'm running for United States Senate. I'm by degree an engineer. Also have an MBA, a few doctorates, but long story short, I describe myself as a father, a husband, and someone who's just interested in serving people. I've most recently been the Lieutenant Governor nominee in 2018, and now I have the support of people across the state of Alabama and even really across the nation to run for this U.S. Senate seat that I believe is very important at this day and time.
Now, what is something that separates you from the other Democrats that are running for this seat?
Well, actually, I'm separated from all the Democrats running for the seat and all Republicans running from the seat in that I have picked up over 660,000 votes statewide, whereas what does that mean? I should back up and say I picked up more votes statewide than any other candidate in the race. Okay. We have one congressional candidate, I should say one who's already serving in Congress. Of course, that's the 5th Congressional District, Lauderdale, Limestone, Morgan, and Jackson, where you hail from. Those counties, but even there, that's one of the congressional districts. I ran statewide, of course, for lieutenant governor and was able to pick up that amount of votes. Of course, it wasn't enough for me to be here as the lieutenant governor, but it was certainly enough to let people know who I am. I've run for office a few times, won a few times, lost a few times, but that gave me an opportunity to learn more about my future constituents and them to learn more about me.
So how does being Alabama being as Republican as it is, especially as we've seen in the past few election cycles, how has that impacted your campaign, if at all?
Well, I really believe Alabama's a blue state, And even though I'm not running to be the Democratic senator, I'm running to become the senator for Alabama, serving Democrats and Republicans. I really wanted to be clear that Alabama's blue. In 2018, when Walt Maddox and I ran, he was the gubernatorial candidate. Of course, I was lieutenant governor candidate. We lost, the variance between him and the sitting governor was about 327,000 votes. The number of African Americans who did not vote in 2018, Mr. Revera, was 337,000. So if you just looked at African Americans alone, and in most cases they tend to lean towards the Democratic ticket, we would have easily have been in the position of being in the governor's mansion, so to speak. That being said, I don't have any doubts that this is a blue state. It's just that we need more people to turn out and vote. And sadly, people don't feel like their vote matters, because as often as we've asked people to participate in the census or participate in the voting process, particularly African Americans have felt like their voice has been muted. A mute point has come in whenever we've seen even the drawing of the congressional lines, where unfairly we've seen the voice diminish down from about the 29% to about 14% representation. So when people feel like they don't have a voice, when African Americans feel like there aren't voting rights that are in place to protect their votes, when women feel like they're being challenged and not being able to have themselves to make decisions from a healthcare perspective, when people feel like youth are left behind educationally, when people feel like the poverty levels aren't being addressed, and we have 800,000 in poverty, when people see that, again, hailing back to the 5th Congressional District, where there are 125,000 women who don't have access to health care. I can keep going on with the numbers. People start to feel like they are just numbers and not people. But this year, especially in my race, I made it a race that's all about believing in Alabama. And I really do believe we have great people, great educators, great business owners, great organized labor people who can work together to turn our state around and make it much better.
Absolutely. Well, let's, start talking about some of the policies that, a lot of Alabamians are talking about right now. So with the 2020 elections and to, some extent the 2016 presidential elections, there's been a lot of concern about balancing election security while also still, increasing that voter turnout, especially like what you've been talking about.
Right.
If elected to the Senate, what would be your approach to this topic?
Well, I think we have to look at it from a voter rights point of view again. And I don't want to blow off the idea of election security, because you could argue as high as 50% of the nation still thinks that there was something that went wrong, right or wrong. We know that people need to feel secure about their voting process. That could be as simple as a license being scanned, some ID being scanned. But at the same time, you don't want to push voters, especially seniors and college students, into a place where they feel like we'll have to run all the way back home, all the way down 85, 65, and 157, and whatever it might be, and get to my home, get a license, get an ID. It should be simple. It should be automatic voting. It should be same-day registration. It should be where there's an early voting process in place, maybe the Friday, the Saturday, the Sunday before, the Monday before, there are opportunities to go vote. It should be a no-excuse absentee ballot process. But at the same time, there should be election security where people feel like if they vote in, let's just say, Montgomery County, that their vote won't show up again in Lauderdale County.
Right.
So that's a security that we need, and we can do that very easily in this environment. But again, I circle back to voters' rights and voters' laws, because I really think people feel like their votes aren't counting. When you have a process in place where now, with the Electoral College, the popular vote, you've seen where in many cases the presidential candidate has received more popular votes and still not gone on to the presidency. So people have some doubts about the process overall. Do we need an election college, or should it just be based on the popular vote? So there's a lot that we need to do, but my first role in the Senate would be to address, again, the Voting Rights Act, Section 5, pre-clearance, making sure that we have all things out of the way in Alabama that would lead to voter suppression, and make sure more people show out to vote.
Right. So over the past 2 years, the entire nation that we've seen has been, deeply impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, we are starting to turn back to normal, starting to see a return to normalcy in our society. Looking back, if you were in, the Senate at that moment, or, preparing for any future pandemics, what would you have done differently or kept the same in representing Alabama?
Sure. I started saying back in 19, very early on, we were focused too much on whether or not there would be impeachment and not focusing on COVID. I was saying this when very few people were even talking about COVID-19. I think we should have done a better job saying what was on the horizon, that we were closer to looking at a pandemic occurring. People were afraid then to even use the words pandemic, you know? So we have to say what it is, address it head on. I think the CDC messages were constantly changing, and we understand why. This was something they'd never seen before. But at the same time, the messaging coming from the White House should be more in concert with the CDC, should be more in concert with local health officials. And I think when you come with an approach where locally, federally, people are seeing people they know, and even people in Washington, D.C. on the same sheet of music, people become more confident. Even with the rollout of the vaccine, it's almost that 50-50 split, the political split once again. Sometimes it's church versus people who aren't in church. I mean, it's sad that we get into these silos, but we allow sometimes some people who aren't qualified to educate us. And we need to be very careful where our information comes from.
So, you know, for Eagle Eye TV, the majority of our audience is college students. We're a college TV station. We're run by college students. What are your policies and your beliefs that would directly impact them?
Well, the first one is investing in Alabama. The investing in Alabama would be investing in, of course, schools like this one, investing in HBCUs, investing in community college, investing in trade schools. So education is so important. I served as a dean and a professor. One of the areas that I served in was the Student Success Center. As Dean of Student Success, outside of me teaching business or teaching in the classroom 100 students at a time, I would actually sit in an office that was right in the middle of the library. I worked to make sure students had everything they needed from their schedules. I had counselors under my belt, and I have a doctorate in psychology with a Christian worldview, so counseling is a lot of my job, a lot of my role now. I'm a bishop, churches worldwide, a pastor, so I spend a lot of time helping people. That all being said, students had a one-stop shop. They could come in, or they could do it on the intranet back then. It was their internal network where you could sign up for classes, you could get a schedule change with me, even if you felt like you needed counseling or even student success services like tutoring. Late at night, we were open way past midnight. So that's what they needed to understand. First of all, investment in education is key. Not only that, we need to make sure that students feel like they can still yet go on further beyond the higher learning level of just the first 4 or 5 years towards master's and doctoral degrees. Right now, the cost of living has been outpaced by the cost of education. Education has become very unaffordable. In Alabama, we need an educational lottery. We need to see where students could have their education paid for instead of us seeing where money is draining out to contiguous states where they're taking care of their students. So that's number one. We need to see public loan service forgiveness in operation. To people who go out and do public work like you will do, you can see loans are quickly forgiven. They're taken out. That's important. To people be rewarded for their work, their labor. But beyond that, we also have to figure out ways to work with organized labor, blue-collar workers. They are doing so well in employing people in Alabama, working with small businesses, making sure they have what they need as they make up nearly 96% of our state's businesses, investing in them and helping them to even go international. I've worked outside of our country. One of my best experiences working in China. I wish everybody had that opportunity to do that. So those are things that are important. Number one, investing in education. We also need to invest in making sure healthcare is where it needs to be. We saw, I mentioned 800,000 people in poverty, but we saw where COVID-19 really stressed our medical system. We see that we have roughly 180 plus beds that we've lost since 2005. We saw 7 rural healthcare hospitals close since that time. We see where the infant mortality rate, the maternity mortality rate is growing. We see where people are further away from hospitals. So a lot of work needs to be done there to make healthcare truly accessible to everyone. And then the third thing is usually voters' rights, as I keep coming back to, but also we need to really tackle climate change. Most people your age, most millennials and generations coming behind are saying that they want to see climate change addressed. Sadly, half the country probably doesn't believe global warming is for real. It's something when you go home for Thanksgiving or Christmas and you're in short sleeves and t-shirts, right? Something's wrong. You know, when I had explained to my 8-year-old yesterday why certain areas of California are struggling with water supplies because less snow is accumulating in the mountains and running down through the rivers. Something is happening with global warming. When we have places right now that are being affected, like Mobile, Alabama, where they have a chemical leak, a spill. We have Lowndes County where people don't have access to sewers, and we're seeing where sewage is just pouring right on the ground, and that's causing contamination to a degree. We have to do a better job at taking care of our beautiful state. So I believe in Alabama, and these are the reasons why I'm running.
Well, we've talked about a lot of different topics today. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about?
Well, I just thank you for the opportunity to be here. Obviously, this is a critical time in our nation's history. I know everybody say every election matters more than any other election, but this is really an important election. Most people don't get out to vote on elections where they don't feel that they're attached to it. There's an issue involved. We usually see low turnouts on gubernatorial races, but I want to encourage every college student possible to get out and vote. Make sure you are registered to vote. Make sure you're taking part in this process because your voice does matter. You can change our nation. You can change our state. From the top of the ticket to the bottom, politics is local. It's important. The decisions we make can affect our future for the next 2 years, 4 years, 6 years. So please go to my website if I could do that. Yeah. drwillboyd.com or boydforbama.com. Either of those will get you there. And you can see all of my policies, what I believe in. I believe in Alabama. I believe that we need to take the labels off. Stop looking at Democratic persons or Republican people and start looking at the person alone. See what they have to offer. I'm a former educator. I'm a former person I'm still a clergyman, but a person who served in a number of capacities, and I'm ready to serve Alabama if the Auburn students will give me a great chance.
Well, Dr. Boyd, I want to thank you so much for coming out here today and joining us on Plain Talk, but unfortunately, that is all the time that we have.
Wow, it went away so fast.
It went so quickly. For everyone watching at home, make sure to check out our website, eagleeyeauburn.com, and follow us on social media at EagleEyeTV. I've been Revera. Thank you, and War Eagle.
Alabama is split up into 7 congressional districts, meaning this election there will be 7 congressional elections happening simultaneously throughout the state. In the 1st district, the candidates running for a seat is Republican incumbent Jerry Carroll and Libertarian Alexander Remery. In the 2nd district, there are 3 candidates, a Republican incumbent Barry Moore, Democrat Phyllis Harvey Hall, and Libertarian Jonathan Reels.
In District 3, there are 4 candidates on the ballot. Those candidates include the Republican incumbent Mike Rogers, Democrat Lynn Vesey, Libertarian Thomas Casson, and Independent Douglas Bell. For the 4th Congressional District, the 3 candidates include Republican incumbent Robert Adderholt, Democrat Rick Neighbors, and Libertarian Johnny C. Cochran. The 5th Congressional District candidates consist of Democrat candidate Kathy Warner Stanton, Republican Dale Strong, and Libertarian P.J. Greer.
The 6th Congressional District race will be between Republican incumbent Gary Palmer and Libertarian candidate Andrea Chifo. In the 7th Congressional District race, the candidates running are Democrat incumbent Terry Sewell, Republican Beatrice Nichols, and Libertarian Gavin Goodman.
This year, Alabama will have 2 women facing off for the first time in history as the frontrunners in the gubernatorial race. Governor Kay Ivey, a Republican and incumbent of the position, is the 2nd woman to hold this office in the state of Alabama after Lurleen Wallace ran in 1966. Ivey is also the first Republican woman to hold the position.
Ivey, a graduate of Auburn University, has a history in Alabama politics, including state treasurer and lieutenant governor. She runs on a platform encompassing a multitude of issues such as pro-life, gun rights, and quality education. For a full list of Ivey's campaign issues, visit kivyforgovernor.com.
Yolanda Flowers has spent over 20 years of her life in the education field. She won the Democratic primary runoff against Malika Sanders Fortier with a 55.1% of the vote securing the nomination. Her campaign runs on the idea of reconstructing Alabama through instituting policies that will do things like expand Medicaid, expand funding for public schools, and reconsidering stiff sentences for lower-level drug offenses.
The Libertarian candidate James Jimmy Blake has served for 8 years on the Birmingham City Council. His main issues consist of protecting the Blackwater River, protecting property rights, fighting inflation, and cleaning up Alabama prisons and treating prisoners humanely.
The incumbent Republican, Will Ainsworth, will run against Libertarian Ruth Page Nelson for the position of Lieutenant Governor. An Auburn graduate, Ainsworth was a member of the Alabama House of Representatives prior to his position as Lieutenant Governor. He has sponsored various legislation, including regulating the sale of alcoholic beverages, authorizing the Secretary of State to share voter lists to state agencies, the Department of Public Safety, and other states, and allowing administrative personnel and teachers to carry pistols on school grounds.
Paige Nelson has campaigned for the position on a multitude of issues to make up her platform. Some of them include making power affordable to all Alabamians, advocating for self-sufficiency, controlling inflation, small government, environmental justice, energy independence, women's rights, veterans' rights, and constitutional rights.
The race for Alabama Attorney General is between Republican incumbent Steve Marshall and Democrat Wendell Major. Marshall has won his primary against Harry Still III with 89.2% of the vote. Before serving as Attorney General, Marshall worked as a prosecutor and later district attorney in Marshall County. Democratic candidate Wendell Major is a former U.S. Marine as well as the first black police chief in Tarrant. Major has spent more than 30 years working as a deputy sheriff in Jefferson County.
There are currently 3 candidates on the ballot running for the Alabama State Secretary: Democrat Pamela Lafitte, Republican Wes Allen, and Libertarian Matt Shelby. Wes Allen has won his party's endorsement after a Republican primary runoff where he gained 63.5% of the vote to his opponent Jim Ziegler's 36.5%. Allen's career experience includes working as a probate judge in Pike County and sponsoring numerous bills for legislation. Some of those bills include issues such as ensuring election integrity, designating the peanut as the official state legume, and prohibiting gender change therapy for minors under the Vulnerable Child Compassion and Protection Act. Pamela Lafitte is a veteran who currently works as a corrections officer with the Mobile County Sheriff's Department, where she has been employed for the last 24 years. She gained her party's nomination after the Democratic primary for her position was canceled. Matt Shelby is described on his Twitter page as advocate of limited government and personal liberty, college sports, and hoops junkie. His main issues include his support for ranked choice voting, automatic voter registration, early voting, and no excuse absentee voting.
The candidates for the position of Alabama State Treasurer include the Republican incumbent Young Boozer and Libertarian Scott Hammond. Boozer has previously served as a state treasurer from 2011 to 2019, in his addition to which he started in 2021. During his time in office, Boozer worked to expand types of investments in which the state treasurer could invest state funds. He established a state-sponsored savings problem for disability-related expenses and established a needs-based scholarship program. Hammond has no reported information or biography about him.
The 2 candidates vying for Alabama State Auditor include Libertarian Leigh Lachine and Republican Andrew Sorrell. Leigh Lachine is an environmental consultant who has served as vice chair and chair of the Libertarian Party of Alabama. Some of the key issues of his campaign include educating the electorate on the problems third parties face when getting on the ballot and eliminating straight-ticket party voting. Andrew Sorrell was nominated after a Republican primary runoff where he won 58.1% of the vote against Stan Cook. Sorrell is currently a member of the Alabama House of Representatives for District 3. This year, he was assigned to the Technology and Research Committee, Ethics and Campaign Finance Committee, and the Financial Services Committee.
We also seem to have 2 elections running concurrently for Associate Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court after both Kelly Wise and Michael Boland's terms end this January. For place 5, we have a race between Democrat Anita L. Kelly and Republican Greg Cook.
Anita Kelly won her party's endorsement after the Democratic primary election for this position was canceled. Kelly was named the Republican candidate in result. Kelly has a bachelor's as well as a JD from the University of Alabama. She has worked as a lawyer in a private firm and later an assistant attorney general for the Alabama State Department, as well as referee within the Montgomery County's Family and Juvenile Court Division and a circuit court judge. Her opponent, Greg Cook, earned the Republican endorsement after winning 55.4% of the vote and beating out opponent Deborah H. Jones. Cook holds a bachelor's degree from Duke University and a JD from Harvard. He has worked as an attorney since.
For the other Alabama Associate Justice place 6, Republican Kelly Wise is running unopposed to retain her position. Wise earned her bachelor's here at Auburn before later going on to obtain her JD from the Jones School of Law. She was elected to the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals in 2000, becoming the youngest woman to serve on the Alabama appellate courts. She was later elected to the Alabama Supreme Court in 2010.
This election, Republican incumbent Rick Pate will run against Libertarian candidate Jason Clark to become the Alabama Commissioner of Agriculture and Industries. Rick Pate has a bachelor's in agriculture from Auburn University and served as the mayor of Lounsboro before becoming the commissioner. Pate has worked in landscaping for over 25 years and hosts a local cattle farm and breeding operation. In his position, Pate has worked to make sure our food supply is safe, abundant, and sustainable. Jason Clark is a computer security contractor who aims to increase Alabama's number of exports, give farmers more freedom to decide what they want to grow, and encourage the use of nuclear power.
There are 2 places for Alabama Public Service Commissioner on the ballot this election. Place 1 is a race against Republican incumbent Jeremy Oden and Libertarian Ron Bishop. Place 2 is a race against another Republican incumbent, Chris Beaker, and Libertarian candidate Laura Lane. Both Republican candidates secured their nominations after a runoff where Oden beat Brent Woodall and Beaker beat Robert McCollum. Oden has been a public service commissioner since 2012, while Beaker has maintained the position since 2015. Ron Bishop studied nursing and radiology at Jefferson State Community College and the University of Alabama at Birmingham and ran unsuccessfully for Irondale City Council in 2020.
Laura Lane runs on a platform that advocates for low-cost, alternative energy and fuel options, works with providers to reach the more rural and undeserved areas of the state, and providing educational resources to help consumers learn more about the resources available to them.
When we come back, we'll take a look at all of those proposed amendments to the Alabama Constitution proposed on the ballot. You're watching Eagle Eyes 2022, Eye on the Midterms.
This midterm election, there are 10 amendments to the Alabama State Constitution proposed for Alabama voters to vote on. Several Eagle Eye reporters, including myself, have gotten together to break down what those amendments on your ballot tonight mean. Let's take a look.
Welcome to Eagle Eye TV's midterm coverage. I'm John Carter, and we're going to be going over some of the proposed amendment changes to the Alabama State Constitution. The first proposed amendment to the Alabama State Constitution was dubbed Aniah's Law, after Ibrahim Yazid was charged with the abduction and murder of Aniah Blanchard from Auburn in 2019, while out on bond for holding 2 men at gunpoint. This amendment would make a change to Section 16 of the Alabama Constitution by allowing judges to deny bail to someone who has been charged with a violent felony after a hearing. The current law states that bond can only be revoked in cases of a capital offense, while the new amendment would extend that power to 13 first-degree offenses. These offenses include murder, assault, kidnapping, rape, sodomy, domestic violence, human trafficking, burglary, arson, robbery, sexual torture, terrorism, and aggravated child abuse. Voting yes to this amendment proposal would mean instituting Aniah's Law to deny bail to those charged with violent felonies after a hearing, while voting no would ensure this power is granted only in instances of capital offenses.
Proposed Amendment 2 would allow counties within Alabama to use federal funds from the American Rescue Plan as incentives to recruit broadband or high-speed internet to build in their communities. Currently, under Section 94 of the Alabama State Constitution, counties are prohibited from offering anything of value to an individual or corporation, which this amendment could change. Alabama recently announced its Middle Mile program, which will use ARPA funding to connect around 3,000 miles of broadband infrastructure across the U.S. But since some of this funding went directly to counties, this amendment has become necessary to allow counties to unlock those federal funds and fulfill the mission of the program. If the majority of voters vote yes on this amendment, it would become clear that the state of Alabama, as well as the counties, cities, and towns that lie within it, would be allowed to grant federal or other state funding to any public or private organization in the interest of expanding access to high-speed internet, while voting no would block the use of funding in this way. In addition, this amendment would only be used to allow local governments to offer federal funding to private or public entities in the interest of spreading broadband infrastructure.
The third amendment proposed on the ballot this election was added as a request from the family of Lisa Ann Milliken, a 13-year-old girl raped and murdered by Judith Ann Neely in 1982, after Governor Fob James commuted Neely's sentence to life in prison in 1999. This amendment would restrict the governor's power by limiting their ability to commute a death sentence to life in prison and requiring the governor to notify the Attorney General, as well as make a reasonable effort to contact the victim's family prior to commuting a sentence. If the governor fails to notify both parties, the commutation would be void under law and the death sentence would be upheld. Those who vote yes would ensure this amendment to restrict commutation would pass despite the fact that there have been no other instances of governor commutations from the death sentence to life in prison since 1999. Voting no would allow the governor to commute sentences under the law that currently stands.
Proposed Amendment 4 on the ballot deals with election integrity. The proposed amendment states that any election law passed by the Alabama State Legislature will be required to have an effective date 6 months before an election. This means that by enacting this amendment, a deadline will be put on the state legislature to pass election laws during a presidential election year at least 6 months before the state's general election. Voters who vote in favor of this amendment proposal would ensure this change is made and set a deadline on how close an election law can be implemented to a general election. Voting no would mean that the law remains as it stands.
The fifth proposed amendment is a request from the Alabama Law Institute to prompt a change in what they say is outdated language. The proposed change would remove the language that give probate judges power over orphans, business, which is considered by the Alabama Law Institute to be outdated in how juvenile legal matters are handled. Voting yes to this amendment proposal would allow a change in what is considered to be outdated language. If passed, this amendment would not change the fact that probate judges would still have the power to preside over adoptions and guardianship matters. Voting no would mean the language will remain as it currently stands.
Proposed Amendment 6 would provide cities and towns with the ability to use ad valorem taxes or special property taxes that they are already allowed to collect directly towards a pay-as-you-go system to fund capital projects such as new construction and repay bonds rather than going in debt. An early amendment of the Alabama State Constitution requires around 40 municipalities within the state to spend that revenue to pay off debt. This amendment will resolve that restriction and allow major cities such as Huntsville and Birmingham to pay for projects without borrowing money. If a majority of voters vote yes for proposed Amendment 6, the pay-as-you-go system will be allowed, whereas if a majority of voters vote no, the pay-as-you-go system will not be allowed. There is no cost to the proposed Amendment 6.
The seventh proposed amendment on the ballot is meant to clarify the language used in Amendments 759 and 772. Currently, Amendment 772 provides a framework in which some Alabama counties, cities, and towns may use public funds to sell public property, lend their credit, or become indebted for economic development. This amendment excludes 14 counties that are stated in Amendment 759 to require notice of its proposed action by the governing body and the newspaper that has the largest circulation in that county, city, or town. The proposed amendment would make it more clear that all counties, cities, and towns fall under the provision of Amendment 772, and the notion that notice must be given in the most circulated newspaper, thereby granting all counties, cities, and towns the same powers and allowing for notice to be given in any newspaper in that area.
Both proposed amendments 8 and 9 deal with bringing some privately owned sewage treatment plants under the regulation of the Alabama Public Service Commission for a time in response to concerns about high fees, if the majority of voters vote yes. Proposed Amendment 8 would apply only to Shelby County, and Proposed Amendment 9 would apply only to the town of Lakeview and Tuscaloosa and Jefferson counties. There are no costs to Proposed Amendment 8 or 9.
The 10th proposed amendment has to do with the constitutional proposal listed on the ballot. Currently, the Alabama State Constitution is the largest. Proposed amendment has to do with the constitutional proposal listed on the ballot. Currently, the Alabama State Constitution is the longest constitution in the world, and in addition to the 10 proposed amendments, is a motion to reorganize Alabama's Constitution in proper articles, parts, and sections, removing racist language, deleting duplicate and repealed provisions, consolidating provisions regarding economic development, and arranging all local amendments by the county of application. This proposal should make no other additions to the changes in the state's constitution. If the proposal is passed, the 10th Amendment would bring all the other amendments passed onto the elections ballot into the Constitution, recompiling rather than adding them onto the end.
This has been your breakdown for the 10 proposed amendments to the Alabama State Constitution in the midterm 2022 elections. Back to the news desk.
Thank you, Ainsley. We'll be back after this short break. You're watching Eagle Eye TV's special Eye on the Midterm show.
Republican incumbent Brian Kemp and Democratic nominee Stacey Abrams face off in an election quite similar to 2018. Both candidates had secured the nomination of their parties, but Kemp prevailed with 50.2% of the vote after rumors of a runoff never came to fruition. This election, though, the tides may have changed. Let's take a look.
God will fight my battle.
In Georgia this year, a fierce matchup between a longtime pastor
It's the Lord's.
and a former football great,
Herschel Walker.
vying for a seat that could determine control of the U.S. Senate.
We have come to rejoice.
Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock, the senior pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, won a special election in January 2021 that helped deliver the Senate majority to Democrats.
Raphael Warnock and Ted Cruz?
As he seeks a full 6-year term, Warnock is touting his bipartisan credentials.
I'll work with anyone if it means helping Georgia.
A Heisman Trophy winner and political newcomer, Republican Herschel Walker, is leaning on his biography.
He has achieved mighty things.
For the first time in the state's history, 2 black men are facing off as major party nominees for the Senate. With less than a week until the votes are counted, the polls show a tight race. If no candidate gets more than 50% of the vote next week, the race will head to a December runoff.
The people of Georgia deserve to see that choice because in this case it's stark and deeply consequential.
Walker, who is running with the endorsement of former President Donald Trump, has sought to tie Warnock to the current president, Joe Biden, who narrowly won Georgia in 2020. 2 years later, his standing in the state has sunk amid concerns about the economy and high inflation.
The thing they're doing to this economy is it not right.
Instead of bringing in Biden, Warnock leaning on a former Democratic president, Barack Obama, to help energize voters and make the case against Walker.
Seems to me he's a celebrity who wants to be a politician.
In the closing weeks of the campaign, the contest was rocked by reports Walker, who is staunchly opposed to abortion rights, pressured 2 women to have abortions. CNN has not independently confirmed those allegations.
I've already told people this is a lie and I'm not going to entertain to continue to carry a lie alone.
For his part, Warnock has largely avoided directly attacking Walker over the reports.
Abortion allegations.
Instead, trying to raise questions about his GOP rival's character.
We will see time and time again that my opponent has a problem with the truth.
With the Senate potentially at stake, Republican leaders and voters have rallied behind Walker. Are you concerned about the abortion allegations at all?
No, because, everyone makes a mistake.
Also in Georgia, Democrat incumbent U.S. Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock is being challenged by former NFL and University of Georgia running back Herschel Walker. Warnock won the Senate seat in 2020 after a special election was called when she traded stocks after receiving a Senate Intelligence Committee briefing relating to the effects of the coronavirus pandemic would have on the U.S. economy. The election went to a runoff where Warnock won with 51% of the vote. The race intensified when Walker, whose platform includes being pro-life, was accused of paying a former girlfriend to receive an abortion with a similar allegation following a week later. The state Senate race will be key in determining who will take the majority of the Senate this winter.
The race for the retiring GOP Senator Pat Toomey's Pennsylvania Senate seat has drawn many eyes nationwide as Dr. Mehmet Oz and John Fetterman both run for the available seat. Dr. Mehmet Oz, a former heart surgeon and television personality, is running as a Republican for political office for his first time. His central issues include energy independence, effectively responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, economic growth, and fixing healthcare. John Fetterman, the current Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania and member of the Democratic Party, is running for a PA Senate seat for his second time, having been defeated in 2016 in the Democratic primary. He previously served as the mayor of Braddock, Pennsylvania from 2005 to 2019. The issues runs on include inequality, racial justice, and ending the war on drugs. Fetterman is recovering from a stroke he suffered in May of 2022, a point Oz has brought up to question Fetterman's fit for office under health concerns. The Democratic Party has its eyes on flipping the previously GOP-held Senate seat in an effort to maintain their current 50-50 majority in the United States Senate. However, the past two presidential elections in Pennsylvania were decided by less than 2 percentage points.
Arizona is a major battleground state this election, where election denialists and democracy defenders are going head-to-head. In both Senate and gubernatorial races, candidates are neck and neck. Here's more from CNN's Kyung La.
Thank you for being the tip of the spear. Let's go manufacture this red wave.
A Republican resurgence pledges Senate nominee Blake Masters in the final stretch, closing with this message.
They've made life in America, life in Arizona, more dangerous, less affordable.
That resonates with Evelyn Tinsley, small business owner, mom of 4.
A lot of things have changed since Biden has gotten into office. Food has definitely gone up. It's crazy, especially with how many people we have.
What Tinsley does not worry about is Donald Trump.
Blake Masters
urging Masters to lie about the election, like Republican gubernatorial nominee Carrie Lake.
Look at Carrie. Carrie's winning with very little money. And if they say, how is your family? She says the election was rigged and stolen. You'll lose if you go soft. You're going to lose that at the base.
I'm not going soft.
What do you say to moderates who are concerned about the economy, but they're also concerned about what you're saying about the 2020 election, the election denials?
I don't think they're concerned about what I say about 2020. I think the most important things by far right now to voters are inflation, crime, and the border.
Democratic Senator Mark Kelly will test that belief with a message of his own, labeling Masters as extreme on abortion, Social Security, and democracy.
Blake Masters has some beliefs that are just dangerous for Arizonans. Somebody who thinks they know better than everyone about everything, letting them make decisions for you is dangerous.
I am a registered Republican.
Election deniers at the top of the Republican ticket is why Keith Greenberg is at the Democrats' rally.
The Republicans have some momentum, but I think Arizonans are smart enough to know how to vote properly and protect democracy.
The husband of former Arizona Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, Kelly is leaning into his experience as an astronaut and his service as a Navy combat veteran.
He is actually a Top Gun.
Propelled in these last hours by a Democratic powerhouse.
And if you've got election deniers serving as your governor, as your senator, as your secretary of state, as your attorney general, then democracy as we know it may not survive in Arizona. That's not an exaggeration. That is a fact.
Catherine Cortez Masto, Adam Laxalt, and 3 others face off for a seat in the U.S. Senate for the state of Nevada. Masto is running for re-election for the Democratic Party. She was the first Latina to ever be elected to the United States Senate. She has worked with local law enforcement to advocate for seniors, women, and children, along with leading the push to break up sex trafficking rings throughout the state. Masto created the Mortgage Fraud Strike Force to investigate and prosecute lending scams, aiding middle-class families during the housing crisis. Masto's opponent, Laxalt, is running for the Republican Party after serving as the Nevada Attorney General from 2015 to 2019. His policies include decreasing inflation, curbing illegal immigration, lowering the crime rate, protecting the Second Amendment, protecting election integrity, investigating COVID shutdowns, and ending legal abortion. This looks to be a close race, with the outcome affecting the partisan balance of the U.S. Senate.
In battleground state Wisconsin, Republican incumbent U.S. Senator Ron Johnson faces off against Democrat Lieutenant Governor Amanda LaBarnes. Johnson was elected to the U.S. Senate back in 2010 after defeating the then incumbent Russ Feingold. At the start of the 116th Congress, he was chairman of the Senate Committee of Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs and a member of the Senate Committees on Commerce, Science and Transport, Foreign Relations, and the Budget. Barnes has served on the Wisconsin State Assembly from 2013 to 2017 before becoming lieutenant governor in 2018. Before that, he worked for the city of Milwaukee. Barnes stated that he would fight to create opportunity in every corner of Wisconsin, bring manufacturing back, create jobs by tackling climate change, and stand up for Wisconsin's family farmers. The Florida gubernatorial race is another important race to follow this cycle. National polling has indicated that incumbent Governor Ron DeSantis is heavily favored to win re-election, but Democrat challenger Charlie Crist is not going down without a fight. Governor DeSantis has a long career in politics. After serving in the U.S. Navy, he represented Florida's 6th congressional district from 2012 to 2018 before being elected governor. He has been in this role since 2019. Charlie Crist has had an even longer political career in Florida. He has served as a state senator, educational commissioner, attorney general, governor, and even represented Florida's 13th congressional district.
For the New York gubernatorial race, Democrat incumbent Kathy Hochul is challenged by Republican Lee Zeldin. The race is tight, an astonishing observation considering New York hasn't elected a Republican governor in 20 years. Hochul, former lieutenant governor, replaced former Governor Andrew Cuomo in August of 2021 after he resigned from office amid sexual harassment allegations and scrutinization of his administration's handling of nursing homes during the pandemic. Hochul is New York's first female governor. Zeldin, an attorney and officer with the U.S. Army Reserve, represented New York's 1st congressional district. His campaign is centered around public safety and how crime rates have risen in New York during Hochul's tenure.
When we come back, we'll have some live analysis from our panel. You're watching Eagle Eye's 2022 Eye on the Midterms show. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Eagle Eye's 2022 Eye on the Midterms. Eagle Eye has gathered a group of panelists to analyze the state of the elections as well as across America. Let's start out by having everyone introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Alex French. I'm representing the Socialist League here at Auburn. Thank you for having me.
Hey y'all, my name is AJ Revera, and I'm going to be representing the Republican perspective.
And I'm Joelle Woggerman, and I'll be representing the College Democrats here at Auburn University.
So, kind of just looking at the things that we've seen so far tonight, a lot of really close races. I know one thing that we kind of all been keeping our eye on out in our control room has been the Georgia race. Has been very interesting, to say the least. I don't know if you guys want your thoughts on what we've seen so far.
What I've been most interested to look at this far is the split ticket voters. As we see, there are plenty of people in Georgia who are voting for Brian Kemp, but are voting for Warnock. And we're seeing a significant difference in how those races are pulling out. And I would be interested to see what that voter pool ends up looking like.
Yeah, I'm especially interested in like the Senate part of that race. Yeah. It looks like it could be split enough to where there's a runoff, and I would be very interested to see like how that runoff happens or how it like plays out. What do you guys think about that?
I think going into tonight, I definitely thought that Herschel Walker was gonna kind of walk away with this outright victory. Looking at the polling before the election, he had a slight edge. Obviously, it was very close, very contentious. I did think that. Looking at what we're seeing so far tonight, it's probably gonna be like you said, probably gonna be a runoff. Just because in Georgia it does need that 50% plus one majority to avoid that. But we'll see. I think what we're more likely to see is the governor race be called outright, probably for Kemp. I know Stacey Abrams has been leading all night, but just before we came back here, it looked as if Kemp had taken that lead. Well, we'll see, obviously, of what that comes down to.
Yeah, I am interested to see. Obviously, Warnock is a fantastic candidate, and in the 2020 election, both Warnock and Ossoff's races went to runoffs, and there was a huge difference in how they did in the general and how they did in the runoff. And so I am very interested to see if this goes to a runoff, if we see the same thing without a dramatic event like January 6th motivating voters, or if we see kind of like generalized lower turnout like you expect in a runoff election.
True. So kind of some of the other topics that have been thrown out at us, talking about the presence of females a lot more in this election cycle. I think that's something that we're seeing a lot on both sides of the party. I mean, I know Democrats have kind of been leading that, but Republicans have their own candidates. I mean, here in Alabama, we have Katie Britt, who has been called and is going to be the first female elected senator, who is a Republican. What are y'all's kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and speak on that. Yeah, I think having a broader representation in politics at a national level is great. I think that's important. I think it's a sign of progress for sure. I think there's only been 58 female senators, and I think only 11 African-American senators. So, yeah, getting a broader perspective in politics is important. But I primarily really only care about the policies to an extent. Like, identity is great, that's fantastic, but I really, and I hope most people care more about the policy issues that these candidates stand behind, not like if they're a guy, if they're a lady, really like where they stand on critical and important issues and how they'll fight for those people in their states. That's what I care about mostly.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that point. Obviously, the policy is the most important aspect of an elected representative, but I would point out that while we are definitely seeing more women on Alabama's ballots than usual, it's just because there's been more Republican female candidates. And while I'm absolutely happy that the Republican Party is catching up on getting to the 50-50 mark, I think that's a majority of the reason that we're seeing more female candidates in the state of Alabama.
Mm-hmm. And there's, kind of like you said, needs to be, representation is great. And getting to that, to where it actually is, the candidates are representing the population is something that's really fantastic and something to strive for, especially in what has been politics. I'm just looking through history, is very male dominated. But like you said, keep having good policy issues to go along with that is really what's going to kind of make it a reality for the future, and something that's actually going to keep being replicable moving forward.
Yeah.
So then next, 35 seats in the Senate open in this election, and 435 House seats. There's some tight races, kind of the ones that we have talked about so far, especially with Georgia. What contingencies to push legislation? So what are y'all's thoughts on like the predictions for House and Senate majority and minority? Do you think it's going to be red, think blue?
I think that the Senate is much more likely to go blue than the House is, especially since I think we're seeing a lot of the Republican senatorial candidates that were put up in this election cycle are quite extreme. And because the problem is, to win a Republican primary in this climate, you have to be quite extreme, but then that doesn't really help you in the general. So I think we are looking at a better chance of the Senate going blue for that reason. But the House, because obviously they're not statewide elections, and because we just went through a redistricting period, there is a much greater likelihood that the House swings red.
Yeah, the fact that like there is such a close, tight-knit race in like the House, for instance, even though like 60% of the Republican candidates are running primarily on election denialism, is kind of like insane to me a little bit. And the fact that the Senate is this close between Democrats and Republicans, to me that shows a poor messaging side for the Democrats, not pushing for issues like inflation. They're not giving any policy positions on that, nor are they doing a strong push on codifying abortion. They're not really talking about that, even though that's one of the biggest issues facing of voters this election cycle and is surely the next presidential election. And the fact that like that Senate race is that close shows me that like Democrats have a issue with actually focusing on policy and pushing back against sort of the reactionary nature of these Republican candidates.
There's definitely been a interesting approach that both sides have taken to messaging, kind of like you said, with, like you said, kind of Democrats not really being a deciding force and kind of letting Republicans kind of dictate like what's being talked about. Obviously, that's at a bit of an advantage to them with President Biden being the sitting president. It's a lot easier for Republicans to criticize what's going on. But well, I think we'll see. I do think Republicans are in a better position, like you said. They're in a better position to win the House, and I think odds are they probably will. In the Senate, 50-50 is a possibility. I think it's more likely one party or the other is going to just win outright. I think the gridlock that was kind of prevented this year has kind of discouraged a lot of voters from wanting that 50-50 split. And I think that cards are just going to lay out that there's more opportunities for that 50-50 split to fall in favor of Republicans getting that extra one seat needed, just because there's more people. It's easier for them to argue against the Democratic policies that haven't worked so far.
Yeah. Like in terms of messaging, I know, like you were saying, there hasn't been a very strong like national Democratic message, but I mean, I think it's important to remember like these are midterms, and a lot of Democratic Senate candidates specifically are polling better than Joe Biden is, or than your unnamed Democratic candidate. And a lot of that is because in these like more local elections, the candidate matters more than the party, which is not true in presidential elections we usually see. So I think it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, like candidates are honing in their message to whatever they think their state needs the most. So you see people like John Fetterman are talking more about, kitchen table economic issues like inflation and gas prices and things like that. Whereas, people in more socially liberal states like New York are focusing in on abortion as like a singular issue. But I think that will tell us a lot about what voters actually care about for the presidential election and for just the next 2 years of legislation, because I think how these candidates do is going to tell us a lot about how their messaging worked.
Thank you to our Eagle Eye Live analysis panel. When we come back, we'll take a closer look into some of the more national races going on across the U.S. You're watching Eagle Eye TV's 2022 Eye on the Midterms. We'll be right back.
In preparation for the midterm election, Eagle Eye's Ainsley Ehlers sat down with several people on campus who are political organizers to get their thoughts on the state of the election. Let's take a look.
Hello everyone, I'm Ainsley Ehlers from Eagle Eye TV. We're here with Seth Johnson today to talk a bit about the upcoming midterms. Seth, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, how about you?
I'm doing great. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, my name is Seth Johnson. I'm a senior in political science here at Auburn, and I'm also the president of the College of Democrats here at Auburn University.
That's amazing. Awesome. So we're just going to get right to it, starting off with the first question. So currently, of the 35 Senate seats open this election, there are 4 major Senate races that are deemed to be very close. In Georgia, Nevada, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, the Democrats will need to make a big push to secure these seats and retain the majority. What strategy do you think the Democratic Party will adapt to win over these states with a limited number of days left before the polls close?
Yeah, there's certainly a handful of races around the country that you mentioned that we're watching very closely. Even here in Alabama, we don't have much influence over those. We're still very interested as it influences the outcome for the Senate. I think Democrats need to be very true to the issues, to the actual politics. I think they get too bogged down a lot about different, a lot of them still focus on talking about Trump or talking about tearing down Republicans, and that's good and well. But there's a lot of issues that I think Democrats are very popular on. Legalizing marijuana, protecting abortion rights access now, especially. That's very popular with the American people. I think we need to focus on those types of issues, and that'll win over a lot of practical voters in those states.
Okay, so like you said, some of the major issues being discussed this election include abortion, voting rights, inflation, immigration, and what happened on January 6th. In your opinion, what do you think are the most important issues for college students in this election?
Yeah, so student loan debt relief is a huge thing. Thankfully, President Biden has made some headway on that recently, hopefully continue progress on that. Climate change is a massive issue with a lot of young people, especially the college Democrats. We have a future that is really up to us to fight for, and if we don't start fighting for that and make bold progress very soon, we're going to be in a lot of trouble down the road. So I think those are two of the biggest issues I hear lots of young people talking about.
And then there are 435 House seats up for election on November 8th, and with the Cook Political Report has rated 31 of these races as toss-ups, where 22 are currently held by Democrats and the other 9 by Republicans. So it would only take a shift of 5 seats to transfer control of the House over to the Republicans. How likely do you think it is that the Democrats will retain their majority over the House?
Yeah, it's definitely a tough House midterm for the Democrats, at least this cycle. That's how it tends to be when you have an incoming president. In Obama's and Trump's first term of their midterms, their party lost a lot of House seats. So this is definitely the trend. We want to avoid that as much as possible. We also recognize that tends to happen. So we want to mitigate those losses as much as possible, pick up seats where we can, and defend the majority you already have, hopefully get on that.
Have the Democrats prepared for the chance that they may no longer retain the majority?
I think it's certainly something, if they haven't prepared, that's something they need to prepare for. Unfortunately, I'm an optimist, but I'm not naive. There's a very real chance, we do lose the House as much as I'd like to keep it. That said, Democrats are going to keep the White House regardless, that much. And then Senate control, as we mentioned before, it's very contested right now. So as long as we can keep those, I think there's still a lot of good work we can do, even with the Republican House, if that happens to be the case.
Do you think they have a plan to push legislation?
I would like to see it. It seems to be, in recent years, becoming harder and harder to push through big, meaningful legislation with a divided government, as what we're talking about here. But I still would like to see some progress if there's a deal that you can make with a Republican House that still holds true to progressive values and policies. That'd be fantastic.
And then specifically here in Auburn, most people, including many students, feel as if only the presidential elections matter. And we wanted to know, why are the midterm elections important, and more specifically, why is this election important?
Yeah, that's something we hear a lot, especially here in Alabama. It's a very conservative state, so it's hard to convince a lot of people, especially a lot of Democrats, to go out and say your vote still matters. You can still make a difference in it. Because a lot of this election, especially here in Alabama, every state Senate seat and every state House seat is on the ballot. These are small local elections that an individual has real power to influence, and these are also the bodies that have the most impact over your daily life. State policy is incredibly important, perhaps now more than ever. So I think it's very important to go out there and vote, especially these midterms, as we see reproductive rights at state. That's going to be a decision that's going to be made in Montgomery now instead of Washington. So it's important we have people in Montgomery fighting for those rights, and we have a power to influence who's there fighting for those rights. So I think that's incredibly important for college students here in Auburn and throughout the state to get involved.
So what advice would you give to student voters who feel as if this larger election does not matter in the grand scheme of things?
I think that is, I can certainly sympathize with that view. A lot of times, I've been involved with politics since I was in high school, and I've done lots of work, and a lot of it didn't feel like it was making a difference. But then, kind of the more you get involved, the more you see what the problems are and how to fix them. And there's a solution that you kind of see in the distance, like almost like a light at the end of the tunnel, especially here in Alabama. There's groundwork that needs to be done in the state to fight for progress, because it's a very Republican state, as we mentioned. But if you don't lay that groundwork now, 10, 20 years from now, they're not going to have that foundation to build off of. So that's something we have to start working through now and keep doing as much as we can despite the odds against us.
And then we've talked a lot about a lot of the issues the Democrats are discussing this election. Is there anything you specifically wish your party did differently?
Yeah, I think messaging has been one of the greatest downfalls of Democrats in campaigns. That's something I'll give credit to Republicans too. They're incredible messengers, and that's why they stay competitive in lots of these races and win lots of these races that frankly Democrats should probably be winning. I would like to see Democrats be able to message more effectively and be able to know their messaging better as far as, like I said, climate change, labor unions is a big topic that appeals to a lot of traditionally right-wing voters that I think Democrats could win over, and things of that nature. So I think if we can message our policies and views better, Democrats should have a lot better chances in lots of races.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Seth.
Yeah,
it's been so nice having you here. Do you have anything else for our viewers before we end this interview?
I just encourage you all to go vote on November 8th. If you need to request an absentee ballot, out at alabamavotes.gov. If not, make sure all your information is up to date and check your voting location.
This has been Eagle Eye TV's special report for the midterm elections. I'm Ainsley Ehlers, and back to News Desk. Welcome back to Eagle Eye TV's midterm coverage. I'm Ainsley Ehlers, and I'm sitting down with Thomas Sparks from the Socialist League. Thomas, can you introduce yourself for us?
Absolutely. I'm Thomas Sparks. I'm a mechanical engineering major, and I'm here to represent the Socialist League on our opinions about the midterms coming up.
Amazing. So let's get right into it. Some of the major issues being discussed this election include abortion, voting rights, inflation, immigration, and what happened on January 6th. In your opinion, what do you think are the most important issues for college students in this election?
For college students, definitely it would be partly voting rights would definitely be one of the biggest, since right now a lot of Republican candidates especially have been getting increasingly stricter about voter registration and access to the vote, which, you know, for democracy to fully function, everyone needs to be out there voting. But definitely, it's also partly a side of the Democrats as well, where there's not enough push or really fervor there, not a lot of pizzazz going on. That essentially is getting people to want to get out there and vote. So definitely right now, even though some of these candidates may not always be the best ones, the perfect ideal ones, we definitely need to get people out there and vote. And so voting rights is definitely one of the biggest issues.
And now, being a part of a third-party organization and supporting it, do you often find it hard for your candidates to win elections, let alone get on the ballot? This is especially true considering there are only 2 U.S. senators that are not affiliated with the Democrat or Republican Party. What has been the strategy this election to get your candidates' names out there, as well as your position on issues heard?
Well, definitely one of the biggest things is doing that word of mouth. And I mean, to look at a successful independent candidate, Bernie Sanders, he was able to become mayor of Burlington because he just went door to door. It was just constant work. And that's really the key to success for a third-party candidate, is for one, to do that door to door, but also to aim small first. You're not going to be able to really make it big, especially with all the institutions that are so focused and so gatekeeping to only the 2 major parties, that the only way you can really succeed is if you go down to the people who are living there and you actually talk to those people and talk about their issues and what's affecting them in the here and now, and not these big culture war issues that take away from what's really affecting Alabamians, especially with terms of poverty and our lack of actual wage growth. Those are the real issues that if a candidate goes in there and goes to a door with it, they'll have a lot more success, and I think a lot of people would think they would.
And with that being said, are there any key races for your party that our audience should look out for this election?
Well, obviously, the Alabama election is always important. It's our state, and we always have to be on the lookout for that election, even if sometimes we might think, well, it's a Republican-dominated state, there's only going to be Republicans. There's still different types of Republicans. And it's not always for sure that a Democrat won't ever win. I mean, Doug Jones won his senatorship seat, so it's not an impossibility. But besides here in Alabama, definitely we also want to look at our next door neighbor, Georgia, who is currently in a toss-up, and quite frankly, with how tight their race is, in a lot of ways, they're kind of a pulse on the nation as a whole, between Herschel Walker and Warnock, in terms of what does the nation think? How do they want to move forward past January 6th and all these issues on election integrity and stuff like that?
And then switching gears for just a bit, you've talked a little bit about voting rights and how important it is to vote. Most people, including many students here at Auburn, feel as if the only elections that matter are the presidential ones. This feeling tends to be especially true for third-party candidates and people who support third parties. Why are the midterm elections important, and more specifically, why is this election important?
Definitely, the one thing that makes this election so important is that this is an election that's very much feeling the pulse of the nation right now, and it's specifically on, can our democracy keep functioning? Because as it stands right now, the majority of Republican candidates don't even concede the 2020 election. They actively participate in the big lie that is being pumped out by Donald Trump that the election was this stolen event. And with that, you increasingly have people who believe that the only way that this election is fair is if it's a complete Republican victory. And that's unhealthy for a democracy because, for one, if there's no concession, you lose the most vital part of democracy. Taking the loss and then building off of your mistakes to actually improve yourself and do something that voters want. And the other big issue is it invigorates this climate of political violence that we're living in right now. Because currently the political violence in the U.S. is out of control. We're having it more and more. We're having actual voter intimidation occur that for a lot of us, we think voter intimidation is this 1960s thing that Klan would do to civil rights activists. But now they're doing it out in Arizona, where they're setting up outside these polling stations and these voter areas where they're just sitting there and showcasing a clear sign that we're watching and we're going to keep watch. That's intimidating people and trying to keep people from voting, and that undermines our democracy. And if our democracy is undermined, the stability of the nation is undermined, and so are all of our institutions.
So with that being said, what advice would you give to student voters who do feel that this election doesn't matter in this grand scheme of things and are intimidated?
I would say, in spite of how much they would want to make you scared, don't be. Because in a lot of ways, a lot of the fellas that do this bluff don't actually have the ability to back it up. They're chest beating. And so the best way to showcase that you will not be intimidated by them is to go out and vote. Is to go out there and just showcase that you will not be intimidated. You believe still that this country can have those democratic elections and that your voice does still matter and has an impact. When you're able to go out there and do that, you undermine this anti-democratic trend that a lot of these candidates are going on.
And then the last question I have for you today is, as a member of the Socialist League here at Auburn University, what is one thing you wish your party did differently, whether in this election or just in the grand scheme of things?
Definitely, I would say one thing I always feel like, and this is not just mine, but I think a lot of left-leaning parties, is focusing more on the context and being increasingly local. Because I think we get so caught up in the importance of national politics, we fail to realize the power that there still is in local elections. A governor still is an extremely important position. Secretary of State is incredibly important. They handle vote counts and a lot of other things going on within the state. Same with just your local mayor even in your town. Because at the end of the day, these are positions that are affecting the lives of at least hundreds of Americans, if not maybe thousands, tens of thousands, maybe millions of Americans depending on the place. So really that would be the thing, not just for the Socialist League, but just all parties generally, is to hit more on those local elections and get down to the actual grassroots of what's affecting everyday people in the here and now.
Awesome. Is there anything else you would like to say to our audience before we end here?
All I would like to say is just make sure to not let these people intimidate you. Don't be afraid of their threats of violence, because at the end of the day, democracy is what matters. And it's important your voice is heard, and you cannot let yourself be intimidated by these people, because that's when you let them win. And we all know that there's too much at stake to allow them to win.
Thank you so much, Thomas. This has been Eagle Eye TV's special coverage of the election midterms here in 2022. I'm Ainsley Ehlers. Back to the news desk. Welcome back to Eagle Eye TV's special midterm election coverage. I'm Ainsley Ehlers, and I'm joined by Jaden Hurd from Turning Point USA. Jaden, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, yeah. So I'm born and raised Auburn, Alabama. Grew up here, love it here. Decided to stay for college, so I'm a business administration major. Estimated graduation is 2024, and yeah, I love Auburn.
Amazing. So we're going to just get straight into it, and I'm going to start off with the first question. Of the 35 Senate seats open this election, there are 4 major Senate races that are deemed to be very close. In Georgia, Nevada, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, candidates will need to make a big push to secure these seats as well as the majority. What benefit comes from having a conservative majority in Congress?
Well, I definitely think a lot of things that are going on as far as our freedoms, and specifically parents right now are very concerned for their children in schools. So you're seeing a lot of things pushed, I think, in schools, especially like in Pennsylvania, you're seeing the Oz and Fetterman race. I think it's very important, especially for parents, to like get out there and vote. Like, you have things that are being pushed onto their kids in schools that they may not be okay with. And I think that's just one specific thing, but obviously abortion is a huge issue right now. I think a lot of conservative people are pro-life, and so if you want some of those pro-life policies to be pushed into states, you might want to get those candidates in pretty honestly, very fast. I think we're going to see a red wave, and yeah, that's what I'm predicting for this upcoming election.
So more specifically for college students, how does a conservative majority benefit them?
Well, college students are the future of our generation, right? So we want to elect representatives that represent not only the entire population, but literally the future of our country, right? The foundation of a country and a society is the children, and specifically teenagers and young adults, right? And so we want to represent, we want to have representation of young adults, young men, young women. And I think the most important thing is for young women and men to go out there and vote. And again, like these topics of abortion and the things that are being taught in schools, not only just the high schools and middle schools, but higher education, huge issues right now. And so I think that's very important and speaks directly to college students. You know, different policies like school choice as well, school funding, and stuff like that is very important right now.
So you mentioned a couple of the major issues that are being discussed right now. You talked about abortion. Some of the other ones include voting rights, inflation, immigration, what happened on January 6th. In your opinion, what do you think are the most important issues for college students in this election?
Well, you said it. Inflation is a huge one. College kids right now, me included, I'm spending $60 on my Nissan Altima to fill up. Never thought I'd have to do that, especially in Alabama. But you know, that's one of the things. Inflation. You're seeing tuition increases every single year, exponentially more now. And then you're also seeing like benefits just start to kind of disappear because you know you can't keep funding it, right? You got to cut government funding in a lot of things, such as VA, right? And so you're seeing a lot of things like students not be able to afford housing as well because they can't afford it, and we're having to take out more loans. Which one of the proposals by Biden's administration was to cut some of the student loans, but you got to think that's going to affect us in the future because guess who's going to have to pay off that, pay someone else's debt? The people who maybe didn't decide to go to college, the future generations who's going to inherit that inflation. And so that's huge. Inflation is like probably the biggest one. Obviously the cultural issues like abortion and you know, the schools and stuff like that. But I would say inflation is probably one of the biggest concerns, especially for young adults who are trying to get their life together.
And then, so I know you talked a little bit about the Pennsylvania Senate race. Are there any key races that our audience should look for conservatively?
Yeah, I mean, again, like the main one I'm looking at is the one in Arizona as well, Kerry Lake. I think that's pretty big. But my main one is like Pennsylvania, like Oz and Fetterman. Those are two guys on, I think Oz is a little bit more moderate than most conservatives like, but I think Fetterman is very like he's pretty far left. So I think that's a huge race, and again, Pennsylvania is always that tight state, like even not only in midterms, but like in the national election, it's just a huge deal. And so I think Pennsylvania is always like a really big one to look at.
And then switching gears just a little bit, most people, including many students at Auburn, feel as if the only elections that matter are the presidential ones. This feeling tends to be especially true for people who don't typically support either specifically Republicans or Democrats. Why are the midterm elections important, and more importantly, why is this specific election important?
So midterm elections, I would say, are more important than presidential elections. You have to think, who is really representing you? Your local officials are really representing your local area, right? The presidential election honestly isn't even a full democracy. It's by electoral colleges, right? And so, to be honest, you have more say in your local elections, you have more say in your state elections, and you have more say in your midterm elections. Like, and these people are directly representing your state. And when it comes down to these issues, when they're getting voted in on DC, like certain issues, these are the people that you're putting in office to represent your state and to make those issues. And so if you really want things to change, like for example, a lot of, again, the abortion stuff, like in each state, if you really want, like, if you're on the pro-choice side and you want, like, the more rights for women or whatever, like, you're going to want to vote in, like, someone who's going to represent your side in your state. That, you're going to have more control in the midterm elections as a U.S. citizen, right? And then specifically this election, again, we brought up those topics, especially right now. I mean, it wasn't the same, honestly, a couple years ago, even before that. It's very different now. But inflation, you know, again, abortion is a huge one. And again, I think the funding and the government spending, the border is another thing too that I didn't even get to mention. But foreign aid and stuff like that, these are all that our local state officials are going to be making. Like, these are decisions that they're going to be making. So I think it's way bigger than, like, the regular presidential election. And I do wish that more people, especially college students, would understand that.
So what advice would you give to student voters who feel as if this election doesn't matter in the larger scheme of things?
I would say do your research, first of all. Look up your local state, like, policy, like your officials' policies, and learn to, like, talk to them, actually. I would say talk to them, learn how these things are going to affect you, and then compare that to how Joe Biden or Donald Trump or anyone else, their decisions are really going to affect you, because it really is astronomically different. Your local elections have way more effect on you than you think, way more than a presidential election. So I would recommend, like, they would honestly just do their research.
And then the last question I have for you today, as a member of Turning Point USA here at Auburn University, what is one thing you wish your party did differently, either in this election or just overall?
Yeah, I have a lot of issues with Republicans in Alabama. I'm not going to lie. Me personally, I think the politics here is really corrupt. But I wish they would really tighten down on, like, cultural issues. Like, again, like, I think the Republican Party has a huge emphasis on, oh, lower taxes, great, awesome economy, wow, higher GDP, awesome stuff, right? But, like, just because, like I don't see, like, how just because Americans have more money in their pockets, I think the country is still on the downfall because the culture is just so on the downfall. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think the society as a whole, for it to prosper, you have to have a culture with good values. And if you're willing to only focus on, like, good GDP, lower taxes, more money in each American's pockets, which are good things, by the way, and I think the Republican Party does a much better job at it than the other party, I don't think that really matters as much as, like, the values that each person has. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's the biggest thing the Republican Party can work on, especially in Alabama, fighting the cultural war and getting more values and, you know, getting more value representation in D.C. from Alabamians, because traditional values are the values of Alabama. So,
thank you so much, Jaden. Do you have any parting thoughts that you would like to share with our audience?
I would say make your vote, go vote, because your voice does matter, regardless of the side that you're on. And yeah.
Thank you so much, y'all. That's been Jaden Hurd from the Turning Point at USA here at Auburn University. I'm Ainsley Ehlers, and you're watching our special Eagle Eye TV coverage of the midterms.
Thank you so much for tuning into Eagle Eye's 2022 Eye on the Midterm show. We've covered many elections tonight, but make sure to visit us on our website, eagleeyeauburn.com, or our social media pages at Eagle Eye TV for more election updates. I've been Blake Phillips.
And I'm Maddie Larkin. Thank you for tuning in, and War Eagle.